Perhaps you have noticed recently, people at church, when we sing praise to the man, is it as exuberant as you remember from your childhood?
Shoveling sycophantic praise onto any leader, whether it's religious or otherwise, is why some people mistake the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for a personality cult rather than a religion.
Or are people holding back a bit?
Well, I sure hope they're holding back. There's no reason to praise a proven liar and a manipulator.
Do we not sing that song as often?
Let's not sing praises or worship a man who had a deeply problematic history.
Will it remain in the newer hymn book as we're making adjustments there?
I mean, hopefully not. That's one reason that the RLDS Church doesn't have Praise to the Man in its hymnal. The LDS Church should follow suit.
When I was a kid, Joseph Smith was one of my heroes.
That's because you believed the whitewash narrative that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints shoveled down everyone's throats, conveniently omitting all of Joseph Smith's serious moral failings and disturbing lack of ethics.
But I'd only heard good stories about him. Some hagiography where we kind of saint people that we're studying.
Exactly. A propaganda narrative spoon-fed to naive members for generations, conveniently ignoring all of the historical evidence against Brother Joseph's character.
And the more I've grown up, passing through the creation stage, through the fall stage, and onto the atonement stage, I've learned all kinds of things about Joseph Smith, including his human foibles, the foibles of human nature, the weaknesses of youth, and so on.
So we're just going to excuse all of his harmful teachings and bankrupt actions as foibles? Folks, that's special pleading at its finest.
I've also tried my best to let him speak for himself and let his contemporaries and peers speak about what they went through as well, so I can keep things in historical context. That's key.
Listen to me, what historical context justifies a grown man marrying a 14-year-old girl? The real historical context is that Joseph Smith was a sexual predator, repeatedly lying to young women and their families in order to fulfill his perverse desires, all the while breaking his wife's heart by doing it behind her back. And some historical context is going to make all of that okay? No.
As a historian myself, context is everything. Right?
Well, as a paid LDS apologist, attempting to justify Joseph Smith's horrific actions is everything to you, isn't it? Just bow your head and say yes.
Don't study church history too little. Don't fall for the superficial or the selective or the sensational that is so often the case.
Oh, right. We should only believe what you tell us to think. Apparently, critical thinking and objective research are discouraged. How convenient for you.
Keep in mind that Joseph Smith's reputation from the very beginning, even before he had one, he was told it would be a mixed bag.
This quote here is supposedly from 1823, but we don't have any record of it until 1838. Yet another retrofitted Mormon prophecy.
This is Joseph Smith history, verse 33. When the angel Moroni appears, he called me by name.
Or was it Nephi? Even early church leaders for decades couldn't get it quite straight who exactly appeared to Joseph Smith, and when, and why.
Which is exactly what the Father had done when he appeared to Joseph Smith 3 years earlier. Well, nice to know that heaven and earth are on a first-name basis.
No, brother, you don't know this. Because knowledge is demonstrable. You just take all of this hogwash on faith. Just be honest about it.
Well, Moroni calls me by name and said unto me that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God to me, that his name was Moroni.
Where is the evidence for this? Repeating baseless claims because of your warm bosom feelings does not make them real or true. Why in the world should anyone believe all of this? There's no actual evidence to support anything. It's just Joseph Smith's self-serving claims.
Don't join any of the denominations, but now it's time for you to know the work that you will have to do.
Or are we supposed to believe the 1832 account penned by Joseph Smith himself, in which he claims that he already knew that no churches were true, and that all denominations or societies were fallen? It's amazing how the story just keeps changing, isn't it?
Thy name should be had for good and evil among all nations, kindreds, and tongues.
Like I said, more like a retrofitted prophecy after Joseph Smith became controversial. Convenient, isn't it?
Now, that would have been eye-opening.
Well, of course, if it actually happened. Where's the evidence?
Well, this whole experience was eye-opening, right? Knocked the sleep right out of him, right? Middle of the night, boom, a light brighter than the noonday sun, and whoa, this is happening again.
Folks, this is what counts as church history in 2025. Passing off unverified supernatural mumbo-jumbo as demonstrable facts.
He's got a work for you to accomplish, but it will be a work of such a nature that it will divide things.
Every cult leader in history has claimed that their work will divide the people. That's not an evidence of a divine truth.
Those who will accept God's servants and their message as it is the same as what God would have us know.
Or in other words, don't question the self-proclaimed prophet. Just keep sweet, pray, and obey.
Good and evil? Religious figures are believed or doubted, but people have strong feelings about them.
And Joseph Smith is rightly doubted because of his documented history of deceit and coercion.
So Joseph, brace yourself. I know a few verses earlier in Joseph Smith history, you were scratching your head wondering, why would anybody persecute me when I'm an obscure boy of no consequence? I'm a nobody.
Not true. He was a convicted glass looker and was a famous treasure hunter that was known for hundreds of miles from Palmyra, New York.
Well, that's about to change.
Oh, right, because he was about to start practicing fraud and polygamy under the guise of a divine commandment.
The more darkness will gather in opposition, and the more light will gather in support. The devil will have power over his own dominion, and the Lord will have power over his saints.
Classic fear-mongering, folks. If you're not with me, you're on the devil's side.
Yes, Joseph Smith's reputation has taken a hit in this information/misinformation age.
Well, gee, Taylor, why would that be the case? Or maybe it's because more people now have access to historical records showing what Joseph actually did, instead of generations of lies produced by church historian stooges like yourself.
I still see frequently, in my study of anti-Mormon literature, evil disposed and designing persons that are militating against Joseph Smith's character as a prophet of God.
Ah, yes, the classic move. Any criticism of Joseph Smith must come from evilly disposed persons who are just there with an axe to grind. This is really no more than Taylor's ad hominem attack, designed to dismiss valid historical criticism. The truth is that much of the so-called anti-Mormon literature is simply an examination of verifiable historical records, many of which come from the LDS Church's own sources. The idea that only bad people criticize Joseph Smith is just a laughable way of dismissing righteous criticism towards Taylor's beloved leader.
They call him a charlatan, a fake.
Well, that's because he was one. Joseph Smith was caught multiple times in engaging in fraud, from his early days as a treasure digger using a peepstone, for which let's not forget that he was taken to court, to his false translation of the Book of Abraham, which turned out to be a rudimentary breathing permit and had nothing whatsoever to do with Abraham. If calling out demonstrable fraud is really anti-Mormon, then I guess reality itself is anti-Mormon.
They call him a money grubber as well as a money digger.
Listen to me, Joseph Smith was literally a money digger. He managed to convince his neighbors that he had a mystical ability to find lost objects at a distance, particularly buried treasure. And he did all of this with a magic rock that he called a seer stone, for which he was eventually arrested in 1826. And later he used his prophetic status to enrich himself, controlling money in schemes like the Kirtland Safety Society, which led to financial ruin for so many of his followers, while he walked away unscathed. And let's not forget that he also demanded money from his followers, calling it a consecration, all the while conveniently using those church funds for personal enrichment and conveniences. So yes, calling him a money digger and a money grubber is simply an accurate description of his behavior.
They call him a theocrat.
That's because he literally tried to establish a theocracy. In Nauvoo in the 1840s, he not only crowned himself mayor, but he also commanded the Nauvoo Legion, which was a huge militia who obeyed his every command. Joseph Smith even created a council that anointed him king, priest, and ruler over Israel and earth. He sought political power to establish a government in which his word would override secular laws. The fact that he was running for the United States presidential office at the time of his death wasn't just an ambitious campaign. It was an attempt to impose his religious ideas on a national level.
They call him a a pedophile.
That's because he married and had sexual relationships with multiple underage girls, including Helen Mar Kimball, who was only 14 years old when she married brother Joseph. He pressured young women into sealing themselves to him with promises of eternal salvation or threats of damnation. And the horrific apologetic response to all of this? Well, that's just the culture back in the day. But the reality is that many people, even during that time frame, found polygamy to be repugnant and the marrying of underage girls morally reprehensible. The historical record is crystal clear. Joseph Smith was a predator who exploited his religious authority for personal gain,
using shock and awe, sensationalized language to try to pull people in the direction of evil speaking.
Critics of Joseph Smith don't need to use sensationalized language. His actual words and actions are damning enough. The problem here isn't that people are exaggerating Joseph Smith's wrongdoings. The problem here is that defenders of the faith like yourself are trying to whitewash them. Also, many of those who initially spoke well of Joseph Smith later turned against him because they saw his deceptions firsthand. Prominent early leaders like William Law, Oliver Cowdery, and even his own brother William Smith distanced themselves from Joseph Smith's actions. Were they all just evil speaking of the Lord's anointed? Or did they actually see the truth?
Using shock and awe, sensationalized language to try to pull people in the direction of evil speaking.
Now, this is the last time that Brother Taylor here is going to reference the so-called anti-Mormons. Notice that he hasn't refuted a single thing that the critics have said about Joseph Smith, and I wonder why that is.
One of the things that amazes me most about Joseph Smith is how okay with all of that he was.
That's because he was a narcissist who believed that he was above accountability. He manipulated people into thinking that he was divinely appointed and could do no wrong. And when accused of wrongdoing, Joseph Smith deflected, attacked his critics, or used religious justifications to excuse his actions. The fact that Joseph Smith was okay with criticism doesn't say anything at all about his supposed righteousness. It's just evidence of his ability to gaslight an entire community into blind loyalty.
So I'm leaving the fruits right there to bear witness.
Exactly what fruits are we talking about here? The lies, the failed prophecies, the deceptions of thousands of people? If anything, Joseph Smith's legacy is a mixed bag of manipulation, power abuse, and falsehoods. And it's ironic that a historian should be looking at historical records, but all we've got Taylor doing is appealing to fruits, bearing his testimony, and substituting feelings where there should be evidence.
Well, perhaps it's because Moroni prepared him from the very beginning. This is what you're in for. You'll be loved and hated.
Or perhaps it was because he was a skilled con man who learned how to manipulate people from an early age. He was already convincing people he could find buried treasure with a rock and a hat before he ever claimed to see an angel. The idea that a supernatural being was preparing him is just another way to avoid looking at the more realistic explanation. He was a fraud who got better at deceiving people over time.
Don't let either one go to your head.
What seems to have gone to Joseph Smith's head was his own self-importance and unchecked thirst for power. He constantly surrounded himself with those who would sing his praises, and silenced or excommunicated those who questioned him. The simple reality is that he used his position as God's true messenger to take advantage of others, both financially, spiritually, and sexually. Listen to me, being loved and hated of all men is not proof of legitimacy. Many false prophets and horrific cult leaders throughout history have been revered and despised. That doesn't make their claims any more true. All of Taylor's spin here is just an effort to reframe legitimate criticism of Joseph Smith's teachings and doctrines and practices as unjust persecution. But the historical record is clear. Joseph Smith wasn't a prophet. He was just a con man who exploited his followers for power, money, and personal gratification. There's simply no good reason to sing praise to the man when that man was built on a foundation of deception.
No praise for the horny-ass con man who lied about meeting Jehovah. Historians have debunked this dubious, desperate guy for many years. All his family struggles helped him develop very strong motives for making money through religious fraud by manipulating gullible peers. No praise for the horny-ass con man who founded Mormonism and stole ideas from 19th century life and fucked lots of other men's wives. Now naive young men and women men sacrificed so much to spread his legacy. But it turns out in the 21st century, it's only working in a handful of developing countries.